Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you guys enjoy this podcast, you can show your support by either writing a review on iTunes or by simply becoming a patron via interviewthefuture.com. Today, my guest on the show has been named one of the world's 10 most influential intellectuals by MIT. Douglas Rushkoff is an award-winning author, broadcaster, and documentarian who studies human autonomy in the digital age. He is the host of the popular Team Human podcast and has written 20 books, including the bestsellers Present Shock and Program or Be Programmed. So, Douglas Rushkoff, welcome to Singularity FM.
Hi, good to be with you.
Fantastic. So, let me ask you this. How do you feel invited on a kind of a singularitarian / transhumanist show?
Well, it depends. We'll find out, Singularity means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The people who hate humans or hate themselves or they look to the singularity as the moment of escape or apocalypse or the end or whatever. And I think a lot of other people look at it as a much more simple, benevolent moment. I think that if as computers learn to, think or process faster or in more complicated ways than humans, it's really, as I see it, no different than the day we made a steam engine that could be as strong as a human or an ox. It doesn't mean that we'll or a recording. Oh, look, we've recorded a person's voice. Now they never have to sing in the same room again. No, once we recorded a person's voice, we've come to see what the difference is between a live performance and and a recording. Or once we get photography, it didn't make art go away, which people predicted at first. It led to, impressionism and abstract art. So, it's all good if we realize that it's not about obsolescing humanity, but if anything, learning what the truly human is.
Fantastic. And kind of that has been the point of my work for the last 10 years, if I may say. Basically, one of the theses, or arguably the thesis that kind of runs across the time of my blog, is that I started from sort of the ethical Socratic point of view, which is why my blogging name is Socrates. And my thesis has been that technology is not enough. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So I believe we're going to have a fantastic conversation, but before we jump into the nitty-gritty, let me roll the tape back a little bit and just ask you, who is Douglas Rushkoff? Who is just the human Douglas Rushkoff?
I mean, that's a big question, right?
Precisely.
What is that? I could approach that from any direction. As I understand Douglas Rushkoff, I'm a theater director who got fed up with the elitism and oversimplified narrative of most theater. The demand of audiences for an ending and this sense of dissatisfaction if they didn't get one. It seemed to me that theater was losing its relevance and connection to people, and the sort of financial landscape of the world wasn't supporting people actually just doing and enjoying theater with each other. And right around then is when the internet came up. So I became interested in interactivity and multimedia, and I became something of a media theorist, in that I got really interested in the relationship, and I still am, the relationship between real life and theater and technologically mediated experiences. So who I am is someone who looks at all that and tries to do a I'm trying to do kind of group psychotherapy on our society, and help people figure out what matters and what doesn't, and uh, to behave better with each other. But yeah, I'm a kind of a creative person and lateral thinker. I like comparing and contrasting different things and looking for patterns and moving on. And I've been a little pessimistic for the last 5 or 10 years, and I'm trying to make myself more hopeful. Because I think that if I can be, I'm just writing a piece about this now, but I feel like if we tell everybody that the world's ending or the climate change is coming and going to kill all the species, then big business will bet on that outcome and bring it about. So now what I'm trying to do is to say, oh no, climate change is going to be averted. Everyone cares. Everyone's going to be doing solar and wind and geothermal, and that the people that get in early on climate change solutions are going to be the next billionaires.
Most Mo- we're gonna grab a few themes of those that you just mentioned, but most people don't know that you started with sort of a pre-medicine, then you went into theater, then you went into media, and eventually technology. And speaking about theater, there's been a lot written about the theaterization of everything around us, from even things like war. And there's been a lot of stuff written on the theater of war that we've been experiencing since at least probably perhaps the first Gulf War in the 90s and onwards. And then perhaps all the way to the theaterization of politics nowadays. So how do you think that sort of background for you helps you to look at technology and come up with a different point of view? Because the biggest people or theorists today, or pundits anyway, are usually like entrepreneurs or inventors like Ray Kurzweil. They're sort of technologists, and you come from theater, which is very, very strange and weird, if you will.
They're business people, so they're not pure philosophers. They're not looking at the ongoing welfare of the human species as their prime motivation. They're trying to sell a product, or a service, or get themselves funded, and those of us who are doing this in a kind of the spirit of pure public intellectual activity, we're pretty few and far between. And almost all of us are fed up with the market and the way digital technology got surrendered to it. The what you're calling the theatricalization of politics and war, I mean, you could look at it that way, or you could look at it as this is what happens when your society lacks theater, when you don't have it, is that the things of the real world become acted. There's no, because it's not theater. It's maybe theatrical, but it's much more like reality TV than it is like theater.
It's more
Theater
of
has,
an entertainment rather than art.
yeah, but without the character Puck coming out at the beginning of the play saying, "Pardon, gentles all, that this stage would represent the world. Please suspend your disbelief and move with us into this fantasy world." Reality TV pretends that it's real. It takes real video footage and edits it together into a totally fake lie of a story, but the pretense is that it's real, even more real than professional wrestling tried to make itself be. And there were people who watched professional wrestling and thought it was, I mean, it's real in a sense, but they thought it was two people in combat with each other, which it's not. It's two athletes doing a very complicated dance.
Choreography.
Yeah, but it's hard. It's hard and real and painful, and I can't do it myself. But it's not combat. And
But you can
likewise,
choreograph it because you're a stage fight choreographer.
yeah, I know what it is. I could choreograph it, but I would get hurt doing it with those guys throwing. I don't have that level of skill. I could do some hand to hand. I can do quarterstaff and rapier dagger, little broadsword. But I couldn't do, the flips and falling in the not at this age anyway. So I respect their craft. I just don't mean to. I don't want to diss them, and I respect the craft of reality television producers and reality television actors. They're actors. They're professionals. They're paid. This is real. They're told what to do in the scene, and then they do it, and pretty believably. But when I feel like, in part, when we lack ritualized narrative experiences, we start to project them onto our world. And I would say definitely as a theater director, it's easier for me to see Donald Trump's performance. I can watch when he's coming up with a new bit, or I understand how improv actors work and what he's doing, and the way in which he's playing this part. But it's sad. It's not real theater. And I do think if we had real theater, we might not have fallen into this spectacle. But the spectacle you're talking about is what the Frankfurt Group was warning us about. This is exactly what Adorno and Horkheimer and Benjamin, they were saying this. By the 80s and 90s, most academics in America, most thinkers, dismissed those folks, saying, look, we had all this TV and we got the internet. That society of spectacle never happened. It just did. It just did, bigger than ever. So now is when we should kind of reread those folks and see what happened.
Yeah, I agree completely. Another group that sort of came up or started its ascent to prominence around the 90s was the group of the futurists. And nowadays, it seems like everyone's a futurist. So in the 1990s, you wrote this piece, Why Futurists Suck. Let me ask you, do futurists still suck today, and why?
Yeah, they do. They suck. Look what they did. I mean, this is what happened. The futurists got hired by business to tell them what was going to happen, or what was most likely to happen, so that the businesses could bet on it. And the more futurists came to dominate business, the more that business saw the future as something that's fixed, that they should prepare and adapt to, rather than something that they could change. So if we can look at climate change, as some futurists might tell us, this is what's going to happen. Here's when the Earth's going to warm up too much. Here's all those people are going to die, and prepare for that inevitability. Or we could look at, well, what could we do as humans? What could we do as a business to actually change the future, to make the future something that we want? So the futurists that I was meeting in the 90s were all of these kind of Wired magazine approved authority figures in things, who were pitching a very pro-business future. They were basically reactionary forces saying, all this disruption is really superficial. Wall Street and the stock market will remain just fine through this whole next revolution. I mean, Alvin Toffler was a real futurist. That was before this breed of fakers. Alvin Toffler was one who said in every major age, there's going to be a new form of government and a new form of economics. Totally new. So we got the agriculture, brought us the monarchy and central currency, So what will this bring? Something as different from the republic, as the republic was from the monarchy, and the monarchy was from whatever that was, the late medieval feudalism.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have people like today, Steven Pinker, who are telling us that we live in the best time of history. We have people like...
right, as long as you don't think about what's happening to everybody else, that's fine. And it's like saying, sure, if you take speed and shoot some steroids, all the metrics are going to look better for a little while, aren't they? You know, you're going to have the greatest time of your life until your nervous system fries. So that's sort of and what is Pinker? Pinker is I was going to say literally, but I don't need the word. Steven Pinker is a neoliberal apologist. He's here to say that neoliberalism works. He's like the intellectual spokesmodel for like the Clinton Foundation and Gates Foundation sort of approach to the world, that all these billionaires are going to make billions of dollars and then put money back into the places where they took it from, and it's all going to be fine. And it's not.
So what's happening to everybody else that we're missing?
Well, it depends where. I mean, in some places, things are getting better, but in spite of what we in the World Bank and the IMF and everybody's doing there. So, I'm excited when I hear about women in Africa using blockchain cryptocurrencies to hide their money from their abusive spouses so they can earn enough cash to get divorced rather than beaten. Because these women, they used to work and the husband would beat them and find the cash. So I'm excited about that, or about microcurrency transactions in India, where there's a new kind of a pro-labor movement emerging from the bottom up because they're capable of
But what are you worrying about then?
that American and other corporations are externalizing slavery and climate abuse to the rest of the planet, and that the planet got too small to do that. They're operating as if there's an exhaust pipe in the back of the car and they can keep going forward and never have to breathe that smoke. But they do now. It's all in the same place. We're still on a money system that requires accelerating growth in order for it to work. And we've run out of room for accelerating growth. Everybody wants to slow down. We can't buy and sell as much crap. We don't have any more consciousness. We have no more space left.
Well, Ray Kurzweil says that we haven't even scratched the surface yet, and he says that the singularity is near. Peter Diamandis says that the future is better than we think, that we would be living in a world of abundance, and that all that we need to do is just to be bold. What's the problem with those visions, or what are those visions missing?
Well, most of the ways that they're saying to be bold means find, a wealthy white Stanford graduate who's taken a lot of game theory and systems theory to come up with a single giant one-size-fits-all solution for the planet. That we're just going to engineer some super thing, or we're going to be bold enough to shoot sulfur into the sky and block the bad rays, or throw iron filings into the ocean. That
mind the asteroids.
Them too. It'd be good to be able to shoot them down if one's going to come hit us. But I don't think that's the most likely problem right now. I mean, there's so many others, so many imminent ones. So what does it mean to be bold if we know that the planet's insects are heading to extinction?
Yeah,
and
I
that
was
when
just
they
sharing
do
today that piece. Yeah,
right. So we know that if and when they do, we all die. Now, what is being bold? You could say being bold is coming up with drone hummingbees that will fertilize everything, and the drone earthworms to clean the soil and aerate it. Or we could say, maybe we want to moderate our rapid extraction of resources in the name of capital so that we can sustain the planet a little bit longer. That maybe solutions that don't cost a lot of money, that we should find a way to be allowed to implement low-cost solutions. Even though they don't contribute to the economy as well, they save, or to the capital economy as well. They save more people in less time and with less effort. But it's a real problem that the easy ways out, I mean, relatively easy, like adopting permaculture strategies and crop rotation and soil maintenance and the sorts of things that really would work, are not considered bold by the likes of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, or whoever wants to build the next, space station.
Mhm. Let me ask you this. You say that there's an anti-human agenda deeply embedded at the level of the operating system of our technology, perhaps even at our civilization. Can you sort of unpack that for us, please?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be easy if people just read a few pages of Team Human. They'll get it a lot easier. Um, there's a lot of ways to look at it, but you want to ask, well, why did digital technology, which was originally intended to connect us all in these wonderful ways and allow for conversations, why is it turned into something that isolates us and represses us and leads us to look at one another as enemies and provokes unthinking kind of stimulus response reactions from people instead of thought out ones? Why does it try to bring out our worst behavior? Why were the social media companies so compelled to take the algorithms from Las Vegas slot machines and embed them in their operating systems? Why do they use behavioral finance to get us to do stuff against our will? Why would they do that? And they do that because underneath the operating systems of any of these platforms is the operating system of extractive, growth-based corporate capitalism. And what that means is not just that there's this ism that's bad. What it means is that the kid who has a great idea and then drops out of college in order to build this wonderful platform idea, he ends up taking money from people he really shouldn't trust. He takes money from Goldman and Morgan Stanley and venture capitalists, who then tell him that the money that he's earning with that platform, the millions of dollars he may be earning every quarter with the platform in profit, that's no longer enough. They don't care about the operating profits of the company. They need to be able to sell the company for 100 times what they invested in it. And that means turning your company from this nice, money-making, profitable, sustainable, helpful application into something that can really extract a whole lot of stuff, something that can become a monopoly in a different area, no matter what the cost to people. So when I say that there's an anti-human bias embedded in our technology, really what I'm suggesting is that the operating system beneath our digital platforms is an extractive anti-human one. And if you look at the origins of capitalism, that's all it was about. It was invented really to squash one of the greatest economic expansions in human history in the late Middle Ages, when people were breaking free of feudalism and trading with each other and having local currencies and marketplaces. It was the most peer-to-peer thing you've ever seen. It was like Etsy writ large, only the rich got poor as the poor got rich. So they came up with rules to prevent that. And what we think of as the corporation or central currency as some natural evolution of the growth of business were the opposite. These were tools that were used to stem the tide, to prevent the rise of the middle class, and to instead extract value from marketplaces. And most people in business today don't even know that. They don't know where this stuff came from. They think that central currency is just money, and that's the only kind of money there is. They think that the only way to start a company is to get millions of dollars from investors. They don't understand that you can actually base a business's growth on the revenue that it takes in and have a sustainable, even a family-run enterprise, that all these are alternative possibilities. But yeah, whether it's capitalism or whether it's people's fear of one another, which is, pretty baked in from a really long time ago. Any of our inventions, our media, our languages can end up going against us, end up using them. We use them to control one another. And that's because we at each stage along the way, we haven't been willing to really interrogate what we're doing and why, and who's controlling a medium.
So let's make this a little bit more specific and clearer, perhaps. What are the problems with sort of central corporations or, I mean, centralized currencies or corporations?
Well, the chartered monopoly, which was the original corporation, the purpose of it was to make it so that nobody but one person, but one company would be allowed to operate in a particular sector. It was literally the king would charter a monopoly. So I would go to you and say, Nico, you are His Majesty's Royal Shoe Company. Anybody who wants
I'll
to
take
make
the
shoes,
West Indies or something, rather.
you want the West Indies? I'll give you the West Indies. You are our nation's exclusive company for the West Indies. And because the West Indies is going to be ours, you own all the businesses in the West Indies are yours. Anybody who wants to set up a shop or make rope or do anything in the West Indies, they are a subsidiary of Nico Chartered Monopoly. Thank you. So you'll do that. And you had a sister?
I have other relatives, but yeah.
What's one that we like?
My wife.
Your wife. Okay, your wife. She's now my wife, but she is going to have my royal shoe company. So anybody who's in the shoe business now works for her. Right? They don't have their own shoe company. So that's what charter monopolies did. And that's great in a way because now the king gets power. Now I'm going to get interest in your company. I get 10% of everything you do, of course. Well, make it 20. But I'll protect you
You're
with
the original venture capitalist.
Yeah. Yeah, except I didn't have money.
Yeah, but
I
you
didn't
have
have money. I
royal
had the
decree.
law. I had the decree.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I have the gunships.
Yes.
So I get that. So that was what chartered monopoly did. And that's the same way Walmart works today. They go into a town, they undercut everybody with their low prices because they have capital. Everyone goes out of business, and then they're the sole retailer in the community and ultimately the sole employer in the community. Then they can pay less wages to everybody and the whole town goes into bankruptcy, and then they move on. The second invention you asked me about was central currency. And the problem with that, again, central currency was invented and all the other currencies were made illegal. So now all of our local currencies, the ones that don't have high interest, the ones that are just issued in the morning and expire at night and exist so we can trade, all of those are illegal. And now we have to borrow money from the central treasury at interest. And that's a problem because if we have to borrow money at interest, we have to pay back more than we borrowed. So where does the more money come from? The economy grows. As long as the economy grows, we'll have more money, we could pay that back. But the economy has to grow. And that worked well when you were going to the West Indies or the East Indies and taking over brown people and taking all their stuff. We were growing. Then what happened by the 1950s was there was no more place to grow. We couldn't grow. So we just started, we used television to promote more consumer demand for goods. And then we ended up in a world that's running out of resources and running out of slaves and people who want to be slaves. And we've reached the limit of that growth. Now, Ray Kurzweil might say, oh, no. And he knows this isn't true. He's actually admitted on the side. Oh, we've got to have exponential growth in everything. There is no exponential growth in nature. There is none. The only thing that grows exponentially is cancer, and then it kills you. Exponential growth doesn't really happen. So, and I know at Singularity University, they talk a lot about getting this exponential growth in your company and everything. No, that's what actually kills planets and species is exponential growth. We don't get that. We're linear, or at best maybe a little curved, but no exponents. And So there ends up being an anti-human bias embedded in both the corporation and in central currency, because central currency is not a tool for humans to use to exchange value. It's a system that's demanding that human beings produce more and more, faster and faster, or else, that we extract more and more, that we live at the mercy of an equation that demands growth. Chartered monopolies were against people. They were literally against people. So that people could not create value and exchange value between each other. Instead, they had to work as employees for some big anti-human corporation that was now going to extract value from you through the metric of time You're going to sell your time to a company. And the only ones who used to do that were indentured servants, were slaves.
So where does Team Human as an idea or as a thesis come in? Is it sort of like the counter sort of idea to this kind of operating system?
Yeah, well, in one sense, Team Human is a response to Ray Kurzweil, and those of his ilk who say that human beings should accept, their obsolescence. We should pass the evolutionary torch to our silicon successors. When I argue that we should have a place for humans in the digital future, Ray and his people say, "Oh, Rushkoff, you're just saying that because you're human." As if I've got hubris, And that's when I said, fine, I'm on Team Human. And I meant it rhetorically, but then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the construct is really important, because being human is a team sport. That's what we forget in our little virtual reality cubby holes. We forget that what makes a technology or a language or a medium or a social instrument or mechanism work is if it's bringing people together and allowing us to function as the collective being we are.
But that narrative is kind of hard to push out there sometimes. Like I remember, maybe it was a year ago, I went to not a conference but to a gathering somewhere, and I sort of push forward that sort of communitarian social nature of being human. And basically the guy next to me like laughed into my face so deeply and profoundly that I was like dismayed and shocked, like, and then came out with the sort of traditional sort of libertarian, maybe even Ayn Randian objectivist thing about like me, myself, and my own property, and like, egoism is altruism, and we are competitive by nature, and survival of the fittest. And it seems like this is kind of the popular narrative today, and the narrative that you're pushing with Team Human and that I was espousing at that moment is not popular one. People don't see it as obvious. They don't even seem to see it as likely quite often, unfortunately.
Right. Well, then they're going to suffer and die. And if that idea wins out, we're not a planet of individuals. The first right that individuals in the Constitution got was the right to assemble. That's because they realize that that's who we are. I guess I'm part of the great conspiracy, right? Which is conspire, literally means to breathe together. I like being with other people, and I think that's where we get our power. I get it. If you're in big business, the last thing you want is for people to be talking to each other. They're going to buy less stuff because they're happy and they have friends, and they're going to forge solidarity. They're going to have unions. They're going to want money. They're going to find their people working together is the enemy of kings who want to control us, of presidents who want us to look across the wall at those Mexicans and see them as less than human, to see them as rapist, killer, MS-13, horrible things. And you get in your house and build your walls and lock your doors and get your big screen TV and stay in there alone. Every night is like the purge, where everybody's out there killing each other. You just get the best guards. And what that does is it leads to the current millionaire and billionaire fantasy, which is that the world is going to explode or there's going to be a massive revolution, and the best they can do is buy land in New Zealand or Alaska and get electric fences and robot guards and private underground hydroponics and keep themselves alive all alone with their old Netflix tapes to keep them happy, or some, Japanese-made, cyber sex doll, and have that until the end.
There's all those people who are buying the sort of the nuclear bunkers, abandoned nuclear bunkers from the Cold War, and converting them into sort of like 5-star, sort of like end of the world habitats where those people can go and sort of...
Right. And that is the end game of the Ayn Rand individualistic path. Right, where the idea, the object of the game is to earn enough money to insulate yourself from the cruel, horrible, competitive world. That's not what Darwin wrote about in his evolution. It's what no real scientist has written about that as the story of evolution. That's the bastardized story of evolution,
Herbert Spencer
retold.
actually coined the term survival of the fittest, not Darwin.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let me ask you this, because I think it's a continuation of some of those ideas. We all know what an anthropomorphism is. Tell me a little something about what you call mechanomorphism.
Yeah, well, anthropomorphism is when you see the human face in your front of your Volkswagen Beetle, or when you put rabbit ears on your Macintosh and call it, Betty. It's like when you see the human in something else. It's a natural thing that we do. Every time we look in a socket in the wall and you see two eyes and a little mouth, like in Munch's the scream, it's like, oh, I see it. Mechanomorphism is the opposite. It's where you see the machine in the person or in yourself. So, okay, am I multitasking? What's my efficiency rate? What are my inputs and outputs? I've got, too much data in my RAM. And when we try to ape the qualities of the machines, which is what we're doing now. And because again, we see ourselves as in competition with the robots rather than that the robots are our tools. And it's a problem in that again, it goes back way further than just technology or digital technology, but it's viewing human beings in terms of their utility value, rather than some essential value. And this is where we get in trouble with both the scientists and the free market libertarians, because I'm arguing that human beings have intrinsic worth. That there's a value to me other than what I produce for the market, that I'm not just an economic actor, behaving out of personal greed.
And one of the sort of side effects of that sort of valuing human beings in a particular kind of way based on efficiency and productivity and so on is, and I want to share with you, in the last maybe 18 months, 2 of our friends have committed suicide. So first, it was...
You mean you and your wife?
Yeah, in our sort of circle of friends here in Toronto, Canada. So first it was a guy, and he was a fan of my podcast and a supporter too, and a donor. He was in his sort of mid-30s, and then he hacked himself one day without any visible outwardly sort of sign that there's trouble. I never realized, and then I went back and I was like, I should have spent more time with the guy. Like, I was shocked. And then just like 3 days ago, actually that girl was kind of a closer friend to my wife's sister, but she had a baby a couple of months ago, and she was like sort of early 30s, very fit young mother, baby 2 months old. And then she hanged herself too. Like, do
She
you
probably
think...
had postpartum depression or something.
Well, that for
organic.
sure played a role. There's no doubt about that. But I'm just saying that there's a lot of suicide rate sort of explosion, if you will, especially in those sort of young people who are supposed to be at the prime of their life, at the best period of their life. Like, we're talking early to mid-30s here, right? You're supposed to be at your peak in any way possibly, physically, intellectually, sexually, like in any kind of way. So do you think that's connected with that sort of utility ascription to humanity and sort of that mechanomorphism and
Yeah, I mean, maybe not directly, but at least no more than 1 or 2 steps removed. So, if our supposedly social media platforms and all of our communications technologies are optimized to extract value from us and to prevent us from forming connections with one another, because the more connections you have with people, meaningful, loving connections, the less money you spend. You don't need to spend money if you're getting laid by someone you love, and you're just gonna fuck all the time, right? You're not gonna start spending money. It's like, why? You want to go to the movies or you want to have sex? Okay, let's fuck. Right? I mean, you want to go do some meaningless experience that costs a lot of money, or you want to hold hands and walk through the woods and look in each other's eyes, right? The more you are actually with people, let's just have a party. You're gonna enjoy. You'll buy potato chips and that's about it. So all of these platforms are geared toward making us like each other less. They're geared toward these kind of snap judgments we make. Oh, there's a guy with a MAGA hat. Oh, I hate him. Oh, there's a black person. Oh, I like them. Oh, there's a this. So in these sort of instant reptile brain judgments and this induced, paranoid, antisocial, judgmental, disconnected state. So the fact that people are feeling more alone today than ever before, that the more connected you are, the more you use Facebook, the more alone you feel, that should tell people something.
I think Instagram is the worst, actually, in terms of like depressed people and suicidal people. And actually, we had another cousin of my wife who attempted to commit suicide but failed. Luckily, she just overdosed on pills, and then we took her to she went to the emergency and we went to see her and all that stuff, but she survived. But she was an obsessive Instagram user herself and still is.
And a lot of people, they reach out for help on the internet, which is really strange too. And I've seen that on the and I thought about closing them for this reason, but on the message boards I have for my Team Human podcast, and people start threatening suicide, and it's like, I mean, what do? You can call the cops and send them to their house, but it's not like they're going to do it that day. They're saying they're going to do it that month or something. And it puts everyone in a tricky position, and I mean, I remember I used to know some people who had suicides on their message boards, and I said, oh yeah, it's because I always assumed it was because of the way that they're running their message boards, or look at who they're attracting, or but it's not. It's actually, it's everywhere. You're right. I mean, there's a mental health crisis that's not, it's not a product of technology. It's a product of software that's
present
been
shock, maybe, that you call.
Some of it, yeah, present shock, that which is what that book was largely about, is what happens when you live in a world that's been engineered to optimize your mind and behavior for certain outcomes and leaving other ones behind. So few people are in the moment they're in. I mean, even singularity people, bless their hearts. The reason I don't spend that much time with that is I find it boring. That it's like, it's an abstraction. I'm so much more interested in what's happening now than what's going to happen in the future.
But it's a very appealing and powerful, abstraction. It's kind of like, sort of like the Christian heaven abstraction is there too, but it's very powerful for some people. The singularity is kind of appealing for sort of more intellectual, more sciencey kind of people, but offering many of the same things, like immortality, like abundance, even utopia, space
Christ
travel.
on the cross was the singularity. Another way of understanding the singularity, it's McLuhan didn't know about the singularity, but in I think it was in Mechanical Bride, he said the one moment when the medium became the message was when Christ died on the cross. That the medium and the message were the same thing. And you can think of Christ's death on the cross, I mean, narratively. I'm not saying historically. I don't know what happened, but narratively, that's a singularity. But it's essentially, it's one of those crossover moments that is the singularity that everybody's looking forward to. And I understand what happens when you take a bunch of Christian people and you create something as discontinuous as the emergence of digital technology, and they feel all unsettled and there's all this wobble. They think, don't worry, Christ is coming, but don't call it Christ. We're going to call it the singularity. So you get the same shape, you get the same story, the same narrative, the same thing that I was complaining about with theater, beginning, middle, and end. Don't worry, you're still going to get your end. It's only going to be this instead of that. So to me, the details don't matter. It's the same mythology. And I understand why we long. It's very human to long for an end. But growing up means realizing, no, life keeps going. It's just, and it can keep going.
I just had this argument today on one of my posts about where I was sort of ruminating on manifestos and dilemmas, because many years ago I wrote my version of the Transhumanist Manifesto, and then I wrote about dilemmas. And I said that today I've kind of went back on this manifesto stuff, and I'm a lot closer to dilemmas, because I thought dilemmas are a lot more honest and truthful. And then this engineer guy, who is a fan of my blog, said, yeah, but I believe that the singularity would create this sort of super smart artificial intelligence, which is going to, you know, create this utopia for us, this abundance, solve global warming and you know, cancer and death and you know, wars for scarcity and resources and stuff like that. What's wrong with that?
One is, you don't need an artificial intelligence to do that. You can do that. We can do that ourselves. You know, two, we're not programming our artificial intelligences to do that. We're programming our artificial intelligences to manipulate people and to extract their money and time and data. So the fact that we're choosing not to do it now, the fact that we're telling the AIs definitely don't do it, doesn't give me hope that AIs will do the thing that we're not doing and that we're not telling them to do. You know, I don't see it. You know, it's an industrial age fantasy that AIs will come up with the solution. You know, and it's not going to work like that. It's going to be millions of distributed solutions. You know, we just got to start rotating our crop. We just got to start taking care of our soil. You know, we have to use less energy.
So what
It's
is the
not rocket
solution
science.
then? Do we need to sort of become sort of technophobes and sort of abandon technology altogether? Because people always say the easiest way to respond to something like that is like, oh, but you're such a technophobe, and do you just want to abandon technology and go back to the Middle Ages? Or, you know, Samuel Butler sort of suggested we destroy all the machines, we give them no quarter, and we hold technological progress at the level of sort of pre-industrial revolution, sort of 17th century level.
Well, right now, human beings with the technologies we have feels like giving a gun to a 3-year-old. You know, we are shooting ourselves in the face repeatedly because we have so little wisdom. You know, we still don't understand what Aboriginal people understood about the soil and the cycles of life, how to rotate crops and why it works in various ways. You know, those are the people that now farmers are turning to for alternatives to Monsanto style, you know, genetic engineering. Like, so no, it's not about rejecting technology, but retrieving technology that we've left behind. You know, we've developed really good war technology, and that's how we took over the world. That's how we killed so many other people. It doesn't mean we're better than them, though, and I think that's a tough and controversial point. Just because white Western Europeans were able to conquer Native Americans doesn't mean white Western Europeans were better than Native Americans, or that the Native Americans weren't more advanced than white Western Europeans in many ways. Now, a lot of people attack this logic as sort of Rousseau's noble savage or something. I'm not going there. I'm just saying that there are technologies that we left behind that would be really useful, that there's some of these civilizations that managed sustainable soil mechanics for, you know, thousands of years, and that we could avail ourselves of those techniques, but we have a very one-sided understanding of technology that really only promotes that which can be patented. So it's not that our technology is bad, It's that our technology is limited by what can be patented and claimed as unique intellectual property. And a lot of things that are really good for people. Back to making love. It's really good for people, but it's not a proprietary set of motions anymore. Could you imagine? It's like, oh, you want to do missionary position? You've got to pay $5 to Facebook. You're going to do doggy style? You got to pay $3 to Twitter. You could have tried to find, it's like, oh, shoot.
It's like Bikram who patented all those yoga poses, right?
It's obscene, right?
Right. Totally ridiculous, but he did it actually. And then he
did it.
had to issue licenses to all those people and was sort of suing them if you want to do those poses, and was winning for a while. I don't know how that whole thing ended, but it was utterly preposterous, and yet it was a reality in a way. It was happening. It was sanctioned by the judicial system.
Yeah. But oddly enough, when you actually want something to work, like the internet, we ended up using an open source system.
You're talking about Apache and
yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, it's all it's all open source because it was like, oh, just screw this. Let's just do something that works and it's interoperable. And we won't have to worry about it.
Well, speaking of open source or something sort of decentralized, perhaps, one of the questions that I had submitted from audience, of course, is Bitcoin. How does Bitcoin fit within this sort of narrative of yours? Does it? And is it going to be a solution to the problems that you're sort of enumerating?
Who knows? I mean, I'm more interested in applications of the blockchain beyond Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's what I meant. My bad.
Yeah.
Completely my mistake. Blockchain. Let's say blockchain. Absolutely. I silly mistake on my part.
Yeah, we'll see. It depends. I mean, blockchain in some ways, and as a Jew, I should appreciate it. Blockchain is a literal ledger. It's the object of blockchain would be to get every piece of value that I'm creating, every bit of value, and have it recorded somehow. As Jaron Lanier has this vision of, we're all producing all this data all the time that's being exploited by others. We should be paid for it. We should know where it came from. And that's better than nothing, to keep track of everything and make sure everybody gets paid for everything they did. And if you get out of bed on the left side of the bed this morning, then the Serta company who makes mattresses finds that information valuable, then you get paid 0.001 cent every time you get out of bed on a different side so they can see how you are. I mean, maybe. And so that every gesture, everything you do is potentially monetized. I think it would encourage people to start living in ways that are producing more data.
The quantified self for sale or for hire.
Right. And start thinking about your world that way. But, I'm less interested in getting all of our activities on the ledger than I am in getting activities off the ledger. And that actually, if you're going to think about it religiously, that's more Christian than Jewish. It's saying, rather than keeping track of what laws I'm following and not, and is it correct or wrong according to Talmud, let me just live with love, live through love, and all those natural appropriate actions will come. So if we, engender a spirit of sharing between people, they're not going to have to keep track all the time of how many did I borrow from you and how many did you borrow from me. It's like if you go to your neighbor's house to borrow an egg, you've got to keep making sure, okay, that's one I owe you, and then you owe me one, and you got water from me, and then you got this from me, and then your kid shoveled my walk, and then you said hi, which actually made me feel so good. You deserve some points for that. It's like, for to the extent that our problems come from our lack of a good ledger, then the blockchain is interesting to me. To the extent that the 2-column accounting ledger that was invented, by the Moors during the Renaissance, to the extent that that's limited our understanding of value in business to debits and credits, that every debit has a credit and every credit has a debit, and it's a very zero-sum understanding of economics, that still guides us today. To the extent that a blockchain could help people imagine more distributed and accretive modes of value creation, then it's interesting. It becomes and this isn't the way people are talking about it, but it seems to me to be a more multidimensional spreadsheet, a more multidimensional ledger that leads to other kinds of possibilities besides, is it mine or is it yours? Is it red or is it black?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see. And then let's go back to your main message here. And of course, we already talked about, so Team Human is your latest book. By the way, just want to put it out there. It's the best book I've read since I read Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens. I highly recommend it, particularly if you are in the sort of community of transhumanists and a singularitarian. It's a must read, in my opinion. So I enjoyed it tremendously. So much so that I've asked you to send me a hard copy because I want to keep one in my library. And before that, I only had the digital copy of it as an audio file, an MP3. And we know how you feel about MP3s. If you read the book, you'll find out.
But it's at least me reading it, right? So that helps.
It's your voice. It does help. So we talked about the team part of your title. Now let's go back to the human part of your title. What is human? And we already talked about what is Douglas Rushkoff? Who is Douglas Rushkoff? So, and how that's a profound question. What about human? What does that mean?
I mean, we're still figuring it out. But I mean, for me, the thing that's interesting about humans and what technology has helped me see is what do human beings really do that our technologies don't? And humans are weird. We're strange. The thing we do that computers don't is we can embrace paradox. We can sustain ambiguity over time. We don't have to resolve things, to a 1 or a 0 in order to work with them. We can stay in that weird, liminal, unresolved place. And I think that's where people are the happiest. That's where they're the closest to ecstasy, where you don't know where you end and the other person begins, where you don't know where to your thought and what's someone else's thought. Is this a collective thought I'm having? Where's my dream come from? It's the part of us that watches a David Lynch movie and doesn't understand what it meant, but still had a great time and says this was fun. What is that? That's humans. Humans are really, I think, the only creature that can live in that in-between space of half comprehension. And that's where possibility lives. That's where novelty comes from. That's where all the new combinations come from. And the reason why I'm trying to celebrate humanity now is because I think that aspect of humanity, the one that really makes us special, is under threat right now. That it's the stuff that doesn't show up in my life bits. It's the stuff that Facebook and Twitter are not interested in. It's the part that doesn't create immediate, financially measurable metrics, and that's so in danger of falling between the cracks because we don't really know what it's for. What if it's for its own sake? What if you're actually, it's there to be there, and that's, again, that gets religious. That's like saying we come in with some value, that there's like a soul animating living things, not necessarily a religious soul, like a, Russian Orthodox soul that goes back to heaven at the end, but just soul, the soul that animates life.
But you said we are the only creature, etc., etc. The downside of that kind of sort of humanism, or if you will, exceptionalism, though, is that some people have pointed out that it leads to a sort of like exceptionalism of that kind leads to speciesism. And for example, in many communities have pointed out, vegans in particular, have pointed out that it leads to us saying we are the pinnacle of evolution. We are the supreme intelligence. We are the only creature that blah, blah, blah. Therefore, we can kill and eat and destroy and utilize and extract. We kill like, I don't know, 70 some billion animals annually on our planet, and something like 1.3 trillion aquatic organisms annually, right? And that stems from, our supremacy, that narrative of us being exceptional and the pinnacle of evolution and this supreme being.
Right.
And
I think it comes from the opposite. I think it comes from us thinking that we're just animals and we're fighting. If we actually accepted that we have a uniquely conscious role on the planet, that we are maybe the only species who could impact the environment as much as we had and do so as consciously as we have, then that obligates us to be the stewards of nature. Nature exists and nature is going to try to survive and nature is going to be cruel. The one thing human beings can do is try to make nature less cruel. Human beings can leave a field more fertile than we found it. We can live with compassion, and only by accepting our unique place, not superior place, but unique role in the scheme of things. Can we really rise to the occasion of our own humanity? And rising to the occasion means developing the ethical framework appropriate for a species of our strength. Now we have, relatively to the planet, we have the power of a cancer, but really not much more awareness of our self-destructive trajectory.
I forget what poet said it, but someone said that human beings have not evolved more for the last 10,000 years than the beaks of eagles. So we have all this power, but not much more wisdom. And of course, Steven Pinker would greatly disagree with that. Let me ask you this, because I'm working on this project called Rewriting the Human Story, how our story determines our future. Because I agree with pretty much most of the things that you said so far in terms of diagnosis, and I'm thinking, what's the solution? And you're coming up with this narrative of Team Human, which I think is a very good and interesting and useful narrative. And perhaps that could be a new story. Probably not big enough for my liking, but very good start anyway. Where do you think the narrative fits within this whole sort of situation that we find ourselves in, and what's the importance of story and the importance of coming up with a new narrative to unite us, whether under Team Human rather than, say, Team America and Team Canada and Team whoever?
I don't know. I'm a little torn on it, actually. I don't know if I like the idea of, having our fate rest on who can tell the best story or the most compelling story. Because right now in America, when there's starving Mexicans or starving El Salvadorians at the border between Mexico and the US, Trump tells a more compelling story about these people than I do. So Americans look and say, oh, look at these terrorists trying to invade our country, rather than look at these refugees seeking asylum from their repressive regimes and poverty where they live. If the person who tells the best story wins the meme, then we may be screwed, because the fake stories are more compelling than the real ones. Fake news and reality TV is more compelling than reality, at least for a time and to a certain kind of trained reptilian brain that most people are using when they're interacting with media. So I get concerned, and I had some good talks with, I had one with George Monbiot, who's very into creating a new narrative for the progressive culture. And he argues that people only understand things when they're in stories, otherwise they'll forget them and not get them at all. And you have to just accept that's the way the brain works, and so be it. Jessica Blank, who I had on the show, is also a narrative person. She's done terrific things through narrative, but some nerdier part of me or more hardline part of me just wants people to see the friggin' facts. It's like,
Because this, putting Donald Trump aside, the singularity and transhumanist narratives are very powerful narratives among not only my audience and our community in general, but some very powerful and influential individuals who have enormous resources at their disposal.
right. And then the question is, do we create new narratives for them? Do I compete with those narratives? I mean, it's mostly a propaganda war at that point. How is my story going to beat their story? If we have to, we have to. But if we're going to tell stories, then I want us to present them as stories, as provisional. Here's one way of looking at it. Here's another way of looking at it. And be open and transparent that we're creating narrative structures.
Yeah, actually, one of my chapters is called "The Danger of a Single Story," and I go, sort of talking about how the story of the future cannot be written by one race or one country, maybe not even by one species. And then, I had some original sort of readings and stuff, and the biggest criticism that I had from people, even though I go through a lot of pain in the end to tell them, the importance of a story is not to give you the answer, but to ask you the right questions so that it sort of motivates you to come up with the best answer. And then the most popular criticism of people was like, we want the story. You've done a great job up to here to convince us we need a story, that the old stories don't work and all of this, but you didn't give us the story. And I was telling them explicitly, I can't give you the story. The whole point is not to give you the story. People
right.
were like...
That's no, and I've ended a bunch of books like that where I have the character even hand the pencil to the reader of the comic to say it's your turn to write the story, and that's, the hope of a distributed, digital, interactive, participatory age is that everybody realizes we're writing the story together. If we're still in the place where we're depending on the Pharaoh to tell us what is, which is where we've come in America anyway, where we're depending on a Pharaoh to tell us what is what, then I don't know if that will give us the wherewithal to make it through the coming crises. I don't know if that's going to work. They work in small kingdoms, but not orchestrating a globe of this size.
I mostly agree with you, but unfortunately we're in the last sort of 9 minutes of our conversation, so I have to push forward. And I want to throw in a couple of questions and points of view from my audience. One of them is from a singularitarian called Clyde Dinkins, who wrote a haiku for you. And so he says, does Douglas Rushkoff truly think that purist singularitarians will sit by idly while he engages in his religio-minded endeavors to only improve flawed, imperfect human nature? I posit my following haiku poem is apropos. As noted, I follow the traditional Japanese format, no title, exactly 17 syllables total, 3 segments, and 575 syllable segments ratio. So here's the haiku. Rushkoff a dreamer, human nature sucks, end it. Ray Kurzweil is right. What's your sort of response to this?
Well, if we go on the trajectory we're going, yeah, human life is going to end, so he'll get his wish. And I guess he wouldn't be here either, so he wants to die. Okay.
Not to die, to transcend biology.
No, he didn't say that. That's not what he said.
Yeah, he said human nature sucks, end it.
Right. So, some other species can transcend biology then. And we'll see. Good luck. That's fine. I mean, it's fine. A lot of people hate themselves and hate the other people. And that's all right. It's interesting to me to live in a world where liking people is radical. It's exciting, actually. It's an exciting thought. Wow. I mean, it's okay. I get it. People have done awful things. You know, they have. But human beings also created art and language and thought. He couldn't even hate the species if he wasn't human enough to have that feeling of hate. You know, lizards aren't thinking, let's end lizarddom. They don't they don't think that way. But I get it. And there's tremendous suicide, as you were saying before. So maybe he's right. A lot of people are killing themselves. And maybe some of them are killing themselves because they agree that humanity should just end. And they're trying to accelerate that process. But I would think at the very least, the parts of humanity that might be most worth saving may not be the parts that we try to program into the transhuman version of Facebook or whatever they want to build, you know, to be the next home for complexity. And I don't think they'll be conscious or aware. You know, so I don't know what the point would be. But yeah, if it's crazy optimistic and hopeful to think that human beings have some value left
in future.
in the future, then I really should keep doing this.
Well, another point of view coming from the opposite sentiment of a sort of a disappointed humanist, perhaps, is a friend of mine. His name is James Harvey. He's this musician from the Gold Coast in Australia, and he loaned me this long email, and the main theme there was kind of betrayal. And he was kind of asking you to ruminate on the notion of betrayal produced by sort of his experience of growing up when Kennedy got shot, Martin Luther King got shot, then we had Nixon, then, you know, we had all kinds of scandals like the Nicaragua and Guatemala scandals. Then we had, you know, Bill Clinton, and now we're ending up with sort of Trumpism. And so that kind of life experience in a sort of this sort of gentle, artistic, and humanistic soul that loves humanity and human beings has produced perhaps a cynical and dispirited and disparaging attitude, if I'm to quote his email. What do you say to people like that? Because they want to be with you, they feel like you, but they've been disappointed by their life experiences.
Life is pain and suffering, you know? The Buddha figured it out, you know? If you really, in some ways, it's the worst but the most beautiful thing. It's been hard. It's been hard for a long time. I mean, you know, it's part of the reason I think people like watching, you know, Game of Thrones or something is because, you know, it's a thinly veiled kind of a medieval world. Is they look back and you can say, oh, well, it was harder back then. You can get a little bit of that sort of Steven Pinker happiness that, oh, look how far we've come since everybody just raped each other and cut off their heads and stuck them on spikes. Human beings can be really, really cruel. And yeah, I lived through those disappointments too. You know, my parents really experienced the discontinuity of the Kennedy assassination, and first president I knew was Tricky Dick, and he resigned, and I got Reagan, and I mean, it was crazy. Watching the beautiful young idealists get shot, and
Right.
yeah, it is. But you know, that's why I turn more to the existentialists and the poets, to Samuel Beckett. I can't go on, I must go on. You know, I mean, look at Waiting for Godot. Look at you know, the Jews of Auschwitz made Hanukkah menorahs out of tinfoil.
Victor Franco is one of my favorite guys of that group.
Yeah.
And in general, anyway.
Yeah. So it's like, what the fuck, you know? So, you know, there's darkness in the human experience, and we've all experienced some of that ourselves. I mean, we've witnessed tragedy and inhumanity and all that, but But we go on, and we can. I mean, I think the best we can do is to spend what energy we have to to well, to create the kinds of structural change that would make these tragedies less common and less widespread. And then, maybe even more importantly, to learn to have the compassion for one another, which then lessens the decree. You know, it lessens the intensity of the suffering of those who are going through this. You know, uh, uh, if you have, family, if you have friends, if you have community, then the tragedy of watching, the Twin Towers in 9/11 go down is different than if you're in it alone without a sense of collective witnessing.
Yeah. And speaking of those structural changes, your whole point, which I agree with entirely, is that what we need to do is change the underlying operating system. And that kind of, by the way, was part of my criticism towards Singularity University, where I did this speech called Socrates Deconstructs Singularity University, and it was called The Emperor Has No Clothes, where I was pointing precisely that fact that it's disruptive at the surface, but deep underlying is more of the same. Anyway, we're out of time, so I just want to ask you, where can people find more about you and your work, Douglas?
I mean, if they want to, but not if they don't. I don't want them to suffer. You know what I mean? If hearing that human beings still have something to offer is going to, take them off the track of annihilating the species as quickly as possible, I don't want to slow them down, right? You got to have your exponential path, and don't
But I
listen to
thought
me.
you actually do want to slow them down, which is why you're doing your Team Human campaign.
Yeah, but not these guys. If they really want to go for it, they should. I mean, they shouldn't listen to me. But if they do, then yeah, come to teamhuman.fm, and you can hear wonderful episodes of Team Human with all sorts of people who are in spite of bad news trying to make the world a better place and get algorithms out of sentencing hearings for parolees and convicts, or trying to promote more human-centered uses of technology, or to help labor or employee ownership of companies. I mean, there's a lot of things we could do to lessen human suffering in the meantime. Even if you want to go to Mars, it's possible that the 8 billion or whatever that are here now don't have to be suffering as much as they are. And I think it's worth our time and attention to,
Yeah,
you know,
my personal attitude towards this is let's go for Mars, let's go everywhere, but let's just not destroy the Earth here while we're trying to get somewhere else. So let's have it both ways
Right.
if we can. That's the whole
Right.
point of abundance, in my
You would
opinion.
think, and you'll have more time. You'll have more time to develop a really good rocket ship to go to Mars than have to do an emergency one that's cobbled together with duct tape.
Right, exactly. Well, Douglas, we've been talking for 75 minutes or so. What's the most important thing that you want our viewers and listeners to take away from this conversation with you today?
That there is an ineffable beauty and power in spending real time with other people. And if you can try to find even 10 minutes a week to be in a room with another person without using any mediating technology to engage with each other, you'll find it's like so powerful. It's so positive. And if you can't find 10, then start with 5 or even 2 minutes a week. It's a really interesting thing just to do it consciously, even.
I would say a few hours a day.
Yeah, well, if you can build up to that, then yeah. But I get it. It's intolerable for a lot of people right now. And I get why, especially if you're aware of it, that you're not on your device or that you're actually with the person in the room. They're looking right in your eyes. I mean, that's hard. That's hard for people. But it's so worth it.
Absolutely. For the last 18 months or so, me and my wife start our day with about a 45-minute walk, just the two of us. And it's been the best thing, not only for us as a couple, but also for us individually. It's phenomenal.
Yep. And I know it feels, for those of us who are trying to save the world, it feels like a guilty pleasure to take 45 minutes away from the work. to actually engage. But in a way, you have to. It's what recalibrates your system. So if you want to think about it in a mechanomorphic way, it's like pushing a really strong reset button. Be with nature and another person. It really does. It changes everything.
Absolutely. As Aristotle said, you need the weekend to do better philosophy on Monday. Douglas Rushkoff, from one human to another, thank you very much for spending so much time with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for what you're doing.
If you guys enjoy this show, you can help me make it better in a couple of ways. You can go and write a review on iTunes, or you can simply make a donation.